Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of the most challenging and, frankly, foundational periods in human history. It's a time that still casts a huge shadow over our world today.
It really does. We're talking about the Transatlantic Slave Trade.
Exactly. And our mission in this deep dive is really to move beyond the usual summaries.
That's right. We've pulled together quite a rich set of sources to really try and unpack its origins, the sheer horrifying scale of it all, the, incredibly complex motivations behind it.
Right.
And of course, its profound, lasting impacts across continents. And that includes looking at the very nuanced roles played by African societies themselves.
Yeah. That complexity is key. So the goal here is to really distill those maybe surprising facts and the crucial insights. We want to give you, our listener, a thorough but still digestible understanding of this history. Mm-hmm. We want you to feel truly well-informed, but hopefully never overwhelmed. So let's dive in.
Okay. So maybe starting with an overview. The transatlantic slave trade is often known as the triangular trade, and it really does represent a deeply inhumane chapter in our collective history.
That phrase, triangular trade, it does help visualize the immense global system it became, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Could you maybe walk us through the actual mechanics? Because it wasn't just a simple back and forth, was it? It was this whole brutal economic machine.
Oh, absolutely. It truly was. Imagine a triangle connecting 3 continents. So first you have European manufactured goods, things like arms, textiles, wine. They traveled to various points along the African coast.
Okay.
Then the most devastating leg, enslaved Africans forcibly transported across the Atlantic to the Americas.
The Middle Passage.
The Middle Passage.
Yeah.
And finally the ships would return to Europe, but now laden with goods produced by that enslaved labor, sugar, coffee, cotton, tobacco.
So the whole system was basically designed for maximum profit, feeding wealth back into Europe.
Precisely. Feeding wealth back into Europe.
The scale of that, it's staggering. I mean, our sources estimate somewhere between, 10 to 12 million enslaved Africans forcibly transported just across that middle leg between the 16th and 19th centuries.
That's right. It makes it a central, absolutely foundational component of the global slave trade for centuries.
And what's striking, too, is how early its roots are. You mentioned the Portuguese navigators started transporting enslaved Africans back in the 15th century.
As early as that, yes. But it was really the burgeoning sugar plantations in the Caribbean and other labor-intensive agriculture like cotton and tobacco in the Americas. That's what dramatically increased the demand.
So that demand fueled this brutal trade for over 4 centuries.
That's that insatiable demand, 400 years.
Those numbers, they really paint such a grim picture when we talk about the immense scale and the human cost. I mean, this wasn't just trade. It was one of the most extensive, systematic operations of forced human migration in history.
It really was, stretching from the mid-16th century all the way up until the 1860s.
Wow. And the geographic scope, too.
Huge. European traders were capturing and transporting African captives from, numerous points along the coast. It stretched from Senegambia in the far west all the way over to Mozambique in the east.
So a vast area.
A vast area.
Yeah.
And many European nations were involved. The Portuguese, Brazilians, British, French, Dutch. They were among the most active.
The British numbers are particularly stark, aren't they?
They are. Our sources highlight that the British alone were responsible for transporting an estimated 3.5 million Africans to the Americas.
3.5 million, just the British. It really drives home how deeply ingrained this system was in those European colonial powers.
Absolutely. Over about 366 years, the estimates are around 12.5 million Africans were loaded onto those Atlantic slave ships.
12.5 million loaded on.
Yeah.
And about 11 million survived that journey, the Middle Passage.
Around 11 million survived, yes. Survived the horrors of the Middle Passage to actually reach the Americas.
It just makes you wonder, what was that journey like? What did it even mean to be on one of those ships?
Well, the Middle Passage became the ultimate symbol of the trade's inhumanity. It was just a hellish journey. It utterly stripped people of their dignity, turned them into commodities.
Here's cargo.
Seen as cargo. The sheer violence, the unimaginable suffering on those ships, it cemented the dehumanization of enslaved individuals. And their forced labor, of course, became the very foundation for major economic developments in the New World.
So, okay, we understand the scale, the horrific human cost. But then you have to ask, how did something so monstrous just keep going? Mm-hmm. For centuries,
yeah,
Our sources really get into this concept they call the unholy trinity, this mix of economic greed, political ambition, and this terrifying social dehumanization.
That's a good way to put it. And it's hard to overstate just how central the economic greed was. The discovery of the New World opened up these vast territories just ripe for exploitation. And that fueled an insatiable demand for economic growth, for profit. Think about the profit margins on crops like sugar, which was becoming a huge global commodity.
So this wasn't just about individual merchants getting rich.
No, it was much bigger. It was about shaping entire national economies around this one horrific trade.
And that ties right into the political power aspect, doesn't it?
Hand in hand. The trade was deeply intertwined with European geopolitical ambitions, control over the slave trading routes, the territories. That became a major focus of international politics. Nations were constantly vying for dominance in this, lucrative trade.
So enslaved African labor directly helped build colonial empires.
Absolutely. It bolstered Europe's political and military might. And our sources show how even things like legislation and international treaties back then were heavily influenced by these geopolitical strategies.
Neither of those, the greed, the politics, could have operated on such a scale without the third part, right? The social dehumanization.
That was the crucial enabling factor. You see, racial ideologies, pseudoscientific theories, they were developed and spread specifically to justify enslaving Africans.
To make it seem okay.
Exactly, to make it seem natural or even ordained. These beliefs permeated European societies, fostering this perception of African people as inherently inferior, as suitable for enslavement.
And that wasn't just a justification after the fact.
No, it was a mechanism. It actively suppressed moral objections to the brutal treatment. And of course, it led to the lasting racial inequalities and discrimination we're still grappling with today.
Wow. Understanding that unholy trinity really shows how these factors created this self-reinforcing system, commodifying people for profit. And the impacts, you can imagine, were profound, lasting across continents.
They really were. If we look at Africa first, the effects were catastrophic. The trade facilitated new forms of political and social organization, often centered around the slave trade itself.
So it changed societies internally.
Profoundly. It also intensified the use of enslaved labor within Africa. The constant demand for captives from Europeans incentivized warfare, raiding between African states and communities.
Leading to depopulation.
Widespread depopulation in some areas, yeah. Social disruption. It hindered economic and agricultural development because you're losing human resources, and there's this pervasive fear everywhere.
And our sources do mention there's some historical debate about whether the trade was the fundamental reason for Africa's later development path, or just one factor.
Right. There is debate on the exact weight, but they clearly underscore its significant, undeniable impact. It was massive.
Okay, and then flipping to Europe, the economic effects there were immense too, but in the opposite direction, right? Profit.
Immense profit, absolutely.
Yeah.
The slave trade contributed significantly to the economies of various European powers. The wealth generated from enslaved Africans from their labor, it was invested back home in all sorts of diverse economic activities.
Growing markets.
Growing provision markets, redistribution markets. It's almost hard to grasp the scale of the wealth generated.
Yeah.
Some cities, some industries, you can trace their growth directly back to this trade.
But there was a downside mentioned too.
Yeah, an interesting adverse effect noted in the sources is that the reliance on these often expensive colonial goods, sugar, tobacco, sometimes limited the consumption of domestically manufactured products in Europe, created a kind of economic imbalance.
Huh. Okay. And then the Americas.
Yeah.
The consequences there were obviously transformative.
Completely transformative. The forced arrival of millions of enslaved Africans brought profound demographic changes, economic shifts, cultural blending.
Their labor was central, right, to the whole colonial economy.
Absolutely central, especially for those cash crops. Yeah. Sugar, tobacco, cotton, the entire plantation system depended on it.
And crucially, it wasn't just economic.
Not at all. The inhumane conditions, the systemic violence, it left this indelible legacy of racial inequality, of social injustice that continues to impact the Americas today. It directly paved the way for the racist belief systems that took hold and continue to shape societies.
Which brings us to maybe one of the most challenging but absolutely vital parts of this, understanding the roles played by African societies themselves.
Yes. This is where the nuance is so important.
Our sources really emphasize moving beyond, simple narratives of just victims and villains. While European demand undeniably ignited the trade on this scale. It's crucial to acknowledge the role, the participation of certain African political and economic elites in the actual capturing, transporting, and selling of people to European traders.
This is a critical point, and it's so important not to paint African societies with a single brushstroke. Sub-Saharan Africa was and is incredibly diverse. Different cultures, languages, political structures, and they experienced the trade in a multitude of ways. Some kingdoms, yes, were active participants. They might have been driven by internal conflicts, maybe expansionist ambitions, or the lure of European trade goods.
Like firearms.
Firearms were a big one. But others fiercely resisted. They waged wars against enslavers, they harbored refugees, and then many others were caught somewhere in the middle, navigating this precarious line between resistance and accommodation in a really brutal geopolitical landscape.
So when we talk about the motives of those African elites who did participate, kings, chiefs, powerful merchants, it wasn't just one thing.
No, it was multifaceted. Internal conflicts were a big factor. Sometimes acquiring captives was about getting soldiers or pawns in political maneuvering or specifically to trade for weapons.
And then there was just the economic gain.
Clear economic gain. The allure of European goods, firearms, textiles, alcohol, it was powerful. Some elites saw the slave trade as a lucrative way to get these items.
And disturbingly, some rationalized it.
Yes, some groups rationalized their actions through maybe pre-existing practices of slavery within their own societies or certain cultural norms or even distorted interpretations of religion.
But, and this is important, not all elites participated, right?
Absolutely not. It's vital to remember that many rulers resisted European pressure. They refused to participate. They tried to protect their populations. Their voices are often just overshadowed in the historical narratives.
Which brings us to another crucial point from the sources. The sheer external pressure. European powers had superior military tech, this insatiable demand. It created a really coercive environment, didn't it?
It did. It profoundly disrupted existing structures. It forced African societies into making these complex calculations, strategies of accommodation, negotiation, resistance. It was not a level playing field by any stretch.
So the choices made by African leaders, by communities, were often strategic responses to immediate threats.
Often, yes. Responses to threats posed by European expansion and coercion, and we also can't understand their participation without considering their own internal politics, their own conflicts, their own cultural norms that influence decisions.
It wasn't monolithic?
Not at all. African societies weren't homogenous. Some groups exploited the trade for gain, absolutely. Others found themselves caught in this web of external pressures, internal rivalries, making choices under duress, often with terrible, far-reaching consequences.
So what does all this complexity mean for our understanding then?
I think it means recognizing the agency, the difficult choices made by African individuals and communities within this incredibly constrained, incredibly violent environment. Moving beyond simplistic stereotypes enriches our understanding so much.
Yeah, it's messy, it's complicated, but necessary to grasp.
It really is. The transatlantic slave trade was, truly an unparalleled atrocity, just in terms of its scale, its duration, the profound suffering it inflicted. It fundamentally reshaped the world in ways we're still trying to fully understand and address today. Its enduring impact on Africa, on Europe, on the Americas, it just underscores these complex interconnections between continents and the lasting consequences of one of history's darkest chapters.
The legacy, it serves as such a sobering reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty, but also, and this is critical, the incredible resilience of those who survived and resisted this brutal system.
Absolutely. Which maybe leaves us with a final thought for our listeners. Considering how deeply entwined economic greed, political power, and social dehumanization were in fueling this trade, what enduring lessons can we draw about the critical role of ethics, of empathy, in shaping global interactions, even today, in our seemingly modern world?